Hello, friends, I've come to you with some presents, namely, a new batch of scary stories, this time with a Christmas theme. That's it, let's begin. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. Happy watching and listening. Story 1, The Wish List. This was already the third time that day when I felt unnatural warmth coming from the spot where a child was sitting on my lap. The feeling of disgust had long since dulled. When the first drop seeped through my costume and ran down my leg, I simply grabbed the kid under the arms, set him down beside the chair, and stood up. The boy burst into tears. The sheet of paper he had been clutching tightly in his little fist slipped from his hands as he covered his face with his palms, choking on sobs. "Hey, buddy, it's okay," I said. "That happens sometimes. Let's find your mom so she can help you get cleaned up." I looked up and saw a pretty blonde woman carrying a pile of shopping bags. She was already hurrying toward us, drawn either by the crying or by the huge wet stain on her son's pants. "I'm his mother," she panted, out of breath from running. "Hello, ma'am," I said when she came closer. "It seems we've had a little accident." Her face flushed. She was clearly embarrassed. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This has never happened to him before," she apologized. "It's really no problem. Occupational hazard," I replied with a grin. The little guy was still crying, and honestly, I understood him. I'm usually not thrilled when someone pees on me either, and this time was no exception. I gently patted his head, like a good Santa should, and reassured him once again that everything was fine. "Please, Santa, at least let us pay for dry cleaning," the woman insisted. I glanced at her hand. "No rings. The mall covers all expenses, but perhaps you'd allow me to invite you for a drink sometime?" I asked, hope creeping into my voice. I thought maybe I could turn this wet situation into something pleasant. The mother smiled shyly, a blush returning to her cheeks. "That would be lovely," she replied. "But let's not mention it to Mrs. Claus." "Oh, don't worry, there is no Mrs. Claus," I laughed. She pulled out a scrap of paper and a pen from her purse, buried beneath her shopping, and quickly scribbled down her number. "My name is Molly. Call me when you're done here, Santa." She smiled sweetly and walked away. I was ecstatic. I cleaned myself up, changed clothes, and returned to work in just 15 minutes. The rest of the day went fairly calmly. No new wet pants incidents. At the end of my shift, I started helping dismantle the North Pole setup where I usually sit and noticed a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. Remembering that Molly's son had dropped his wish list when I left, I automatically slipped it into my pocket to give it back to her later. After finishing up and changing clothes, I jumped into my car and headed home. At the very least, I wanted to take a shower and make myself presentable, to prove to her that I wasn't some loser reeking of urine in a Santa suit. Once in my apartment, I laid the paper from my pocket on the kitchen island. Grabbing my phone, I turned the slip with Molly's number toward me and dialed. As the phone rang, I noticed some bright marks on the crumpled wish list. Apparently, the kid had drawn a picture for the cheerful old man in the red suit. I slid the paper closer, about to examine it, when I heard her voice on the line. "Hello?" Molly asked. "Hi," I said cheerfully, pushing the drawing aside. "It's Santa." Molly laughed. "I was waiting for your call. I'm glad to hear from you. How about a drink tonight?" "Of course," I replied, and I could hear her smiling. She gave me the address of her favorite pub near her place. I promised to take a quick shower and text her when I was on my way. "Oh, and Santa," she added before hanging up. "Why don't you bring the costume along? You never know, maybe I'll end up on your naughty list." She giggled and disconnected. You can be sure I packed the Santa suit. I took a quick shower, lathering up several times to eliminate even the slightest hint of urine. I figured Molly might be put off by that. I mean, she clearly had a thing for the Santa costume, but I wasn't sure she was into golden showers. Jumping out of the shower and getting dressed quickly, I grabbed my phone and Molly's son's wish list from the counter. Halfway down in the elevator, I texted her that I was on my way. Turning the paper in my hands, I remembered that I wanted to look at the child's drawing. I unfolded it and saw a true nightmare, captured in wax crayons. Among the childish scribbles was a man in a red suit with a thick white beard and a Santa hat, tied to a bed. Kneeling over him was a naked blonde woman holding a thin gray object in the air. From the neck of the man in the red suit, dark red crayon blood was spraying like a fountain. The boy had drawn his mother killing a man dressed as Santa during their sexual play. The elevator reached the first floor, but I stood frozen so long that the doors opened and closed again, assuming I had already exited. I kept staring at the drawing and noticed a figure beneath the bed, almost hidden by the red geyser. It was a small boy. He was curled into a ball, hands clamped over his ears, hiding beneath the spraying entrails. I gasped and stepped back instinctively, nearly tripping over the bag with the Santa costume that I had set on the floor beside me. The elevator started moving again, startling me. I screamed. When the doors opened on my floor, I bolted out, colliding with a neighbor. He muttered something irritated at my back as he stepped into the elevator. With shaking hands, I unlocked my apartment door, rushed inside, and slammed it shut, sliding the bolt into place. Shock and adrenaline flooded my system. I leaned against the door and slowly slid down onto the floor. Eventually, I broke down and cried, clutching the drawing tightly in my hand. The warning the boy had given me that morning. And then my phone rang. It was Molly. I began barricading the front door to the sound of the cheerful ringtone, ringing again and again and again. When the roar of blood in my ear subsided and my pulse steadied, I took several deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves. My chest rose and fell heavily as I absorbed the silence of my apartment. Silence. The phone stopped ringing. I picked it up from the floor where I had dropped it moments earlier and looked at the screen. 5 missed calls. 3 messages. No voicemails. Well, Molly might be crazy, but not crazy enough to think I'd check my voicemail. After all, I'm only in my early 20s. I was terrified to open the messages, but curiosity won out. The first one just said, Santa. The second was the standard follow-up, 3 question marks. But the third was far more ominous. I hope you didn't chicken out, Santa. I'd really hate to have to come looking for you myself. Creepy as hell, but at least she doesn't know where I live. The paranoid part of my brain immediately whispered, what if she does? No. That was nonsense. Completely ridiculous. Taking another deep breath, I got up and went back to the kitchen. I grabbed a glass from the drying rack, filled it with water, took a big gulp, and set it on the kitchen island. Without really looking, I placed the glass directly on top of the drawing that had terrified me. Apparently, the glass wasn't completely dry, because moisture slowly spread from its base across the paper. The child hiding under the bed began to blur as the paper rippled from the water. I shook my head, amazed by the insanity of the situation. And then it hit me. The child under the bed. Holy shit. I called the police. I explained that after a kid peed on me, his mother agreed to go on a date with me, but the child slipped me a drawing predicting an ending straight out of a porn nightmare. The cops, of course, realized how horrifying the situation was and immediately rushed to her home to investigate. Except we both know that's bullshit. It was a week before Christmas, and the cops had plenty to deal with besides my bizarre story. So when the officer on the line said, "Yeah, buddy, we'll check out that pub you mentioned as soon as we can. See if there's a woman matching your description," I couldn't even blame him. I thanked him for his time and realized it was time to act myself. That child needed Santa. First thing I did was call Molly. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. She didn't answer for a long time, and I thought she was angry and ignoring me. Then there was a click, and I heard her voice. "Hi, Santa," she said irritably. "Molly, hi," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "What's going on? I didn't expect you to be such a jerk and stand me up." "Oh, Molly, I'm so sorry," I began. I hoped she mistook my shaking voice for frustration over being late, not sheer terror of her. She didn't need to know that I understood everything, at least, not yet. There was a power outage in our area, and I got stuck in the damn elevator. You know, a huge metal box. No signal at all. I could only hope she wouldn't think to check my alibi before I got that child out. Molly took a deep breath, then exhaled loudly into the phone. "I'm sorry. I was really angry at you. But getting stuck in an elevator is scary. Listen, it's already too late for the pub. I lost hope of waiting for you and left about 10 minutes ago. It was completely packed. Molly, I'm really, truly sorry. I feel like I ruined everything. Don't be silly. It's not your fault the power went out. Like I said, there was nothing to do at the pub anyway. But maybe we could try somewhere else?" "That would be great," I replied, forcing a smile. Everything was going smoothly, too smoothly. But I decided not to overthink it. I just needed a chance to grab the kid and run to the police with him. "Molly, forgive me if this is too bold," I said, "but I was thinking, maybe as an apology I could swing by your place with a bottle of wine, and we could have a nice little date at your home. That way you can keep an eye on the kid, since it's already late." "That's a bold proposal," Molly replied sharply. "But you're lucky, Santa. I like bold men." I exhaled in relief. "Wonderful. I have a bottle of Chateau Graysac Bordeaux. I think it'll be perfect for our conversation." She laughed, and her laughter still sounded like music. How did she manage to seem so pleasant? "With pleasure," she said and gave me the address. "I'll just stop by home quickly for the wine and then come straight to you." It was time to prepare. If Molly wanted Santa, she was going to get that damn Santa. 30 minutes later, I pulled up in front of her house, fully dressed as Santa Claus. It was time to act. The whole drive I blasted heavy rock at full volume, winding myself up. I had to be ready for anything. I got out of the car and adjusted the fake belly, which was supposed to wobble like a bowl of jelly. As I approached the front door, my hands were shaking. I tried to press the doorbell and missed. That's how badly I was trembling. After taking a couple of deep breaths, I gathered my courage and rang the bell confidently. It took barely 10 seconds for the door to open. She had clearly been waiting nearby. Molly swung the door open. She was wearing a thin black robe, her hair styled up high. "Hi, Santa," she whispered in an incredibly seductive voice. "Hi, Molly," I managed to say. I should explain something here. I was terrified that this woman might be a secret Santa killer. But she had transformed from the sweet girl next door I'd seen at the mall into a stunning sex goddess standing right in front of me. She looked at me like she was about to devour me alive, and promised I'd enjoy every second of it. Seriously, all I had was a child's crayon drawing. Maybe the kid was just strange. Kids can be strange. So when she grabbed me by the collar of the costume and pulled me inside, I barely resisted. I hardly even heard her slam the door shut and lock it behind us. All I could think about was the flash of her thigh as she moved, and the scent surrounding her like spring mist. When the door closed, Molly turned to me. She slowly ran her hand along the belt of her robe. "Well then, Santa," she said. "Have I been a good girl this year?" "I'm sure you have," I replied, watching her fingers slowly loosen the knot. "Oh no. Let me try to convince you that I've been very naughty." With those words, she spread the robe open and let it slide off her shoulders. "Holy shit," was all I managed to say. "Exactly," Molly confirmed. Then she grabbed me by the jacket, pulled me in, and kissed me like I'd never been kissed before. That's probably why I didn't immediately notice her grabbing my wrists, not until I felt the cold metal. The handcuffs snapped shut, locking my hands in front of me. Molly's eyes narrowed as she slammed me hard against the nearest wall. She pulled the long hairpin from her hairstyle and pressed it to my throat. I could feel how sharp it was against my skin. "Did you really think I was stupid?" she hissed, her voice turning savage, completely unlike anything I'd heard from her before. "I know you figured it out. That little mutt managed to warn you somehow, but it's too late now. You're a pathetic, stupid little human. The annual Christmas sacrifice will take place. Tonight, I'll bathe in a fountain of Santa's blood." As she laughed, pressing the sharp pin harder into my neck, only one thought ran through my head. I really should have thought this plan through better. How the hell was I supposed to get out of this? Alright, let's clarify one thing right away. I know I'm an idiot. I get it. I suspected Molly might be a Santa killer, but since she was insanely hot and possibly a Santa killer, I ignored that fact. And now here I was, my throat pressed against a giant metal pin. That was the result of my decision-making process. In truth, this was just the final link in a long chain of stupid choices. But I was trying to save a child, and damn it, I was Santa, well, a mall Santa. Close enough. And I hadn't come completely unarmed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Molly had just announced that she wanted to bathe in a fountain of Santa's blood, and I really didn't want her to do that. But when your hands are cuffed and there's sharp metal at your throat, your options are limited. So I decided to lay my cards on the table. "Listen, Molly, let's not do anything rash." She stepped back just far enough to kick me hard between the legs. I collapsed. It hurt. A lot. Groaning on the floor, I tried to deal with the pain as best I could with my hands restrained. "Undress," Molly ordered, towering over me. I was too busy trying not to throw up from the pain, so I didn't move fast enough. "Faster," she growled and kicked me in the thigh. "Why?" I managed to gasp. "We need to complete the sacrifice. And a sacrifice requires a ceremony. And why do I need to be naked for the ceremony?" I started, then stopped mid-sentence. The drawing. I hadn't just seen a brutal murder. I had seen a ritual layout. Molly was going to kill me exactly the way the kid had drawn it. I didn't want to die, and I definitely didn't want to become part of some ritual. "Stop stalling. Undress," Molly demanded, preparing to strike again. "Whoa, easy. I'm doing it, I'm doing it." I got up and reached for my belt, starting to undo the buckle. "Molly, this would be a lot easier if you took these bracelets off." She stepped back, opened a drawer, and pulled out the biggest knife I had ever seen. The thing looked like a machete. "With 9 fingers, it'll be even harder," she said, stepping closer. Wow, I had no idea taking clothes off in handcuffs was so easy. I muttered in my most cheerful "please don't kill me" voice. "Good," she snapped. I unbuckled my belt and decided to pull it completely out of my pants before doing anything else. I needed to drag this out as long as possible. "Listen, Molly, why all this? Why sacrifice Santas? I believe in something far more powerful. And it craves the flesh and souls of Santa." Yeah. That sounded terrifying. I unbuttoned my pants and started pulling them down. "You should be afraid. But you're lucky. Your death will spare you from suffering when it takes over this world." I forgot to take off my boots. In a panic, I thought I could pull my pants down over Santa's massive boots. I was very wrong. Everything below my knees turned into a catastrophic mess of twisted red fabric and black leather. Molly must have looked at that knot of my failed decisions and decided I was just stupid, not clever. She stepped closer, bent down, and lowered the knife. "I'm going to cut the pants off you. Try to twitch or resist, and I'll cut your legs off at the knees." The choice is yours. I like my feet, so I let her cut. The knife sliced through the fabric like butter, and Molly seemed to relish the way my eyes widened at the sight of that razor-sharp blade. "Now, take off the boots," she said, straightening up. Yeah, I replied, leaning toward my left boot. "Listen, if the power of this thing is so horrific, why are you even summoning it? This doesn't end well for anyone, including you." "On the contrary," she countered. "The one who summons him becomes his consort, his partner in all the coming terror. The demon lord will satisfy my every whim." In short, Molly was insane. Not the crazy enough for a few dates but don't marry her kind. She wanted to be the queen of demons. Who even dreams of that? I finished unlacing the left boot, pulled it off, and started on the right. "I gotta say, Molly, this is some next-level cringe," I muttered. She only laughed. The second boot came off. I stood up again. "The underwear stays on until the very end," I declared. "Fine, just hurry up." I unzipped the big red jacket. I couldn't pull it off over the handcuffs. I started unbuckling the straps of the massive prosthetic belly. "By the way, where's the kid? Is he a sacrifice for your demon too?" "He is the final touch. The child must witness it, so that his Christmas joy and faith in Santa are utterly destroyed. Your death is the beginning, and then I will sacrifice him to release all that tainted joy. It'll be just an appetizer for the nights of terror to come." So, the boy was locked somewhere near the ceremony site. Judging by the layout, likely one of the bedrooms. Remember I said I hadn't come entirely unarmed? Santa's belly wasn't just foam. I'd thought about hiding a kitchen knife in there, but that was a great way to accidentally gut myself. Instead, I went a different route. I'd gutted the stuffing and stuffed it with my weighted blanket. I know, sounds weird, but it helps with my panic attacks. It's silent, it's soft, and it weighs a solid 20 pounds. Any more and the belly would have fallen off. As I unbuckled the last strap of that gift, I swung it with everything I had at Molly. She didn't expect the resistance. With her hands occupied by a knife and a hairpin, she was defenseless. The 20-pound belly slammed into her shoulder and head. She stumbled, dazed by the sudden impact. Before she could recover, I ripped the blanket from the hollow shell and threw it over her. It shrouded her completely, blinding her and tangling her knife hand. I lunged, hitting her with a shoulder tackle that would have made my high school football coach proud. Molly slammed into the wall and crumpled to the floor. Time to move. I spun around and bolted into the hallway, screaming the boy's name. I checked every door. Bedroom, office, bathroom, closet. Everything looked normal. Then I rounded a corner and saw a flickering light. Candles? Of course, it had to be damn candles. I burst into the room. It was bathed in candlelight, with handcuffs already bolted to the bed frame, red symbols scrawled on the walls, and a small boy chained to a nightstand. He was sobbing through a gag. I rushed over and ripped it out. "It's okay, buddy. We're getting out of here." He nodded, jerking his arms against the chains. Damn it, damn it, damn it." I muttered, frantic for a key. The chains looked strong, but maybe the nightstand was the weak point. I lifted it. It weighed maybe 70 pounds. Lugging that along wasn't an option. I slammed it against the floor with all my might. The wood groaned but held. I struck again, aiming for the side where the chains were anchored. Another strike. The crack grew louder. One last heave, a chunk of wood splintered off. I grabbed the bracket and pulled with raw desperation. Splinters sliced into my palms, blood slicking my fingers, but the wood finally gave way. We were free to run. And that's exactly when the kid screamed. I turned just as Molly flew into the room, knife raised high. I lunged forward, shoving the boy back and trying to catch her arm. She twisted, and the knife buried itself in my shoulder as she slammed into me at full speed. We tumbled onto the bed. Molly ripped the knife out of my shoulder. It hurt worse than the entry. She raised the blade again, but I used my good arm to catch her wrist, flipping her over me. She hit the mattress hard. The knife skittered away. I was bleeding everywhere, everything was getting slick. We both reached for a weapon at the same time. She went for the knife and would have beaten me to it. But I aimed for what was closer. I grabbed her wrist and, in one violent motion, jammed her hand into one of the handcuffs already bolted to the bed. Click. She was pinned to the bed by her right hand. I scrambled up and saw a red mist beginning to rise from the floorboards. We had to leave. Now. Molly hissed and howled. As I turned, she kicked me square in my wounded shoulder. I hit the floor with a guttural scream. I had never felt agony like that in my life. I crawled away from the bed, away from her. The red mist thickened. "Kid, where are you?" I roared. I felt a hand grab mine. He was right there. "Let's go," I wheezed. He grabbed the wooden fragment of the nightstand he was still chained to, and I hauled myself up against the wall. We were stumbling toward the exit when an unearthly roar erupted from the bedroom. I looked back. A creature with jagged horns, long talons, and saw-blade teeth was literally crawling out of the floor. It wore the shredded remains of a Santa suit. Realizing this was way above the pay grade of a mall Santa, I pushed the boy ahead of us and we sprinted around the corner. "I have tasted the blood of Santa," a deep, crackling voice boomed from the bedroom. "But there is no Santa here for me to take." "No, my lord. He escaped. Give me more time, I'll bring him back to you," Molly shrieked. The boy and I burst into the living room. "You summoned me here, and I will feast," the demonic voice thundered. "No, please. No." Molly's screams turned into wet sobs. I reached the front door and yanked the handle. Still locked. I threw the deadbolt, shoved the boy outside, and heard the monster bellow. To the sound of piercing screams, tearing flesh, and the crunch of bone, the boy and I flew out of the house, jumped into my car, and tore away into the night without looking back. Part 2, The Mall Santa. Children's joy always seemed like something magical to me. The sound of their laughter is the best music I know, and I love how their faces light up when they see me. That's why I took the job. I worked as a Santa Claus at the local mall. I loved seeing the excitement in the little ones' eyes as they tugged on their mother's hands, trying to get my attention. When I waved back, they'd whisper in a mix of fear and delight, "Mommy, did you see? Santa waved at me." My heart melted every single time. They'd climb onto my lap, hug my neck, and beg for a new doll or a race car. I'd wink at the parents, and they'd nod back. The dream gift was already bought and waiting. I'd ask the kids if they'd been good, and they'd obediently list their good deeds. Then I'd look them in the eye, wish them a Merry Christmas, and give my most soulful ho-ho-ho. That was life during the holiday season. Everyone seemed happier. I was ecstatic to be part of that Christmas miracle, giving a fairy tale to those who still believed. Destiny had handed me this job. You see, I'm a disabled veteran. I was medically discharged after being wounded serving overseas. In Pakistan, my truck hit an IED and I lost a leg. When I got home, nobody wanted to hire a cripple. Depression set in. I gained weight, stopped shaving. And just when I was ready to give up, I saw the ad, Santa Claus Wanted, Southampton Mall. It was a blessing from above. Before I knew it, I was standing before the manager, Frederick, in full Santa regalia. Frederick, speaking with a thick German accent, looked me up and down. "Mein Gott," he exclaimed, stepping back to admire the result. "You were born to be Santa Claus." I turned to the mirror. Ruddy cheeks, a thick beard dyed snow white. I was the living embodiment of Saint Nick, the Coca-Cola version. Frederick clapped his hands and muttered something in German I didn't understand. Frederick was a stout, barrel-chested man himself. He was much older than me, and with his bushy sideburns, he bore a striking resemblance to Otto von Bismarck. All season long, he patrolled the area, checking how his Santas were handling the crowds. Wherever a Santa sat, Frederick was lurking nearby, listening, watching, monitoring the quality of the show. I called his operation Bismarck's Reich. His dedication was flawless, almost maniacal. Frederick was truly a man possessed. On December 5th, I was holding my usual meet and greet at the mall. The stage was set grandly. A massive plaster model of Santa's workshop loomed in the background. 2 luxurious Christmas trees, 3 meters tall, stood on either side of a large red chair. Giant candy canes were neatly arranged along the red carpet. The mall had even installed a snow machine that blasted out a flurry of artificial snow every 10 minutes. I stepped out to the crowd as "Here Comes Santa Claus" boomed from the speakers. The children screamed with delight. I felt like a real celebrity as I settled into the chair and beckoned the first child over. A little girl approached me. Her light brown pigtails bounced amusingly as she climbed onto my lap and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck. "What's your name, young lady?" I asked, peering at her over my glasses. "Elizabeth," she shouted happily, lisping slightly. "And how old are you, Elizabeth?" 5.5, she announced proudly. "And have you been good this year?" "Well, my big brother is a real meanie," she said thoughtfully. "Sometimes I really want to hit him." She clenched her tiny fists and swung them through the air like the world's smallest boxer. "And do you?" I asked cheerfully, glancing at her mother, who was shaking her head, barely holding back laughter. "Nope. Otherwise I won't get any presents." Elizabeth grinned wide, proudly displaying the gap where her 2 front teeth were missing. "Well then, what would you like for Christmas, my dear?" "A new puppy." Her tone suddenly turned serious. "I had to say goodbye to my dog this year. I'm terribly lonely without him." My heart clenched. I knew all too well what it meant to lose an old friend. Before I could respond, she asked, "Santa, can I ask you something? How do you manage to visit all the houses in the world in just one night? My brother says it's impossible." "Where I come from, time works differently," I said. "One day in your world is a month in mine." That was the kind of answer I could give to an older, smarter child. Instead, I rested a hand on her shoulder, leaned closer, and whispered, "It's all about magic, Elizabeth. Magic helps the elves make the toys on time. Magic lets me fit all the presents into one bag. Magic makes my reindeer fly and helps me get down chimneys, even when there isn't one. And magic helps me eat all the milk and cookies you leave out." I gently tickled her belly, and Elizabeth burst into giggles. "And I get that magic from children who believe in me. Children like you." That seemed to convince her. She looked ready to run off and immediately enlighten her brother. "Okay, but just in case you forget," she added loudly, "I live at 21 Hamilton Lane." Her little voice echoed across the hall. I glanced at her mother, who was clearly mortified that her daughter had just shouted their address to the entire mall. "I know, Elizabeth. I know," I said, gently tapping her nose with my finger. "Now run along, and Merry Christmas." Ho ho ho. Elizabeth returned to her mother, who immediately began scolding her for talking too much, though I doubted anyone in the crowd had really paid attention. Watching her go, I made myself a promise. I'll do everything I can to make Elizabeth's wish come true. But fate had other plans. When the workday ended, Frederick suddenly materialized beside me. He praised me for an excellent performance. I was pleased with myself too, the day had gone perfectly. "Listen," Frederick said when we were alone, "tonight is an important night for all of us Santas. A night of drinking and celebration. We're meeting right here in the mall at 11. I'll be waiting. Whether it was the post-shift euphoria, the successful day, or my unwillingness to look like a loser in my boss's eyes, I agreed. Oh, and one more thing, Frederick added as he walked away. Bring a bottle of peppermint schnapps, if you don't mind. I stood by the service entrance of Southampton Mall. Snow drifted softly from a dim red sky, covering the world in a fresh blanket. I inhaled the frosty air and tucked my hands into the pockets of my hoodie. Frederick appeared behind the glass door. His face was a pale, ghostly outline in the darkness. He fiddled with the lock until he finally let me in. "You bring it?" he asked immediately. I pulled the bottle of peppermint liqueur from my pocket. His face lit up. "Wonderful. I knew I could count on you." I stepped inside, leaving the cold behind and sinking into the darkness of the mall. Being here after closing felt strange. The holiday decorations looked the same as during the day, but without the lights they seemed unsettling, almost ominous. The emptiness pressed on my nerves. Our footsteps echoed loudly off the tiles as I followed Frederick toward the stage. I nearly jumped out of my skin when two figures rose from the shadows and walked toward us. The shadows smiled. It was Bill and Eric, my Santas from Tottenhamshire. We shook hands and introduced ourselves. They looked like brothers, though it was hard to tell with their thick beards. I still couldn't shake the shiver they'd given me. We felt like teenagers sneaking into a store for some nighttime mischief, except we were grown men drinking in an empty shopping mall. The absurdity of it began to dawn on me. Frederick wouldn't let me open the schnapps right away. He said the bottle was for later. Instead, we drank beer Bill and Eric had brought. As the alcohol warmed my body, the eerie feeling of the empty mall slowly faded. Soon we were laughing and swapping stories. Eric told us about the time a kid bit him, and we burst out laughing. Frederick, however, stayed quiet, constantly checking his watch. A few times I heard him mutter impatiently in German. "Anders is late. Idiot. Doesn't he know what night this is?" he grumbled. It was nearly midnight. "Come on, Fred, lighten up." "More booze for us," I said, clapping him on the broad shoulder. He shot me such a piercing look that I immediately pulled back, as if he'd suddenly turned into a rabid dog. "Traditions are not to be taken lightly," he thundered. "I told him to be here half an hour ago." His voice echoed throughout the mall. I was confused. I wanted to ask what he meant, but stopped myself. Hurried footsteps approached, accompanied by the jingle of bells. I turned and saw a tall man walking toward us. He wore a Santa suit, but he was far too thin for the role. His bony limbs looked comical inside the baggy red costume. A row of bells was tied to his boot, jingling cheerfully with every step. Slung over his shoulder was a burlap sack of gifts. He looked like a living version of Jack Skellington. Frederick's mood changed instantly. He jumped to his feet and spread his arms wide. "Anders. You had me worried." "My apologies, Mainher," the scarecrow-like man replied. "Things took longer than expected." The tall, gaunt man and the short, stocky one met in the center of the darkened hall and began speaking rapidly in German. The conversation was heated. Frederick gestured sharply, while Anders waved his free arm in broad motions. I listened, mesmerized by the foreign language, when suddenly my ear caught a familiar word. Hamilton. It rang out clearly, like a buoy in a storm of harsh German syllables. They kept talking. Hamilton again, this time spoken by Frederick. Why did that sound so familiar? My gaze drifted to the sack on Anders's back, and suddenly it hit me. Hamilton Lane, 21. My heart dropped straight into my heels. Anders moved toward the chair. He walked quickly, as if time itself were pressing him. He threw the sack onto the chair and stepped back. In the dim light of a distant lamp, I stared at the sack in horror. There was no way Anders had gone to Hamilton Lane, 21, to abduct little Elizabeth, who was now lying inside that filthy canvas. The sack twitched. Through the rough fabric, I saw the outline of a tiny shoe. A child's shoe. I jumped to my feet. "Stop!" I screamed. Frederick and his entourage turned toward me, their faces carved from stone. I tried to rush the sack, but the moment I moved, Bill and Eric grabbed me and slammed me to the floor. The festive atmosphere vanished like a snowman at noon in summer. In its place came cold and fear. "I seem to have misjudged you," Frederick said heavily. "I didn't want to believe you'd grown attached to the girl. I was wrong." Frederick advanced on me like a thundercloud. His boots thudded heavily against the tiles. For a moment his hand disappeared into his coat pocket, then emerged holding a pistol. He aimed it straight at the bridge of my nose. I stared, mesmerized, into the black hole of the barrel as the hammer clicked back. It would have taken me 1 second to knock the gun from the German's hand. He wasn't expecting resistance. In his moment of confusion, I could have jumped him, knocked him out with a precise blow to his fleshy nose, then turned the gun on the others while I saved Elizabeth. My military instincts should have kicked in instantly. But the German was faster. "Don't even think about it, soldier," he warned, carefully stepping back. "I was fighting wars when your father was still in diapers. You twitch, I blow your brains out." The air around Frederick changed. The good-natured manager vanished. In his place stood a cold, ruthless man. My body went rigid in his presence. "Now give me the schnapps," he demanded. I didn't move. Without taking his eyes off me, Frederick nodded to Bill and barked, "Schnell." Bill rushed over and dug into my pocket. With his head lowered, he pulled out the damned bottle of liqueur. I cursed the moment I'd bought it. Bill placed the bottle beside the chair and carefully stepped back, as if it were some kind of sacred altar. Frederick checked his watch. 4 minutes to midnight. "We made it, gentlemen." The stocky German looked at me again. His gaze was calculating, but I swear, deep in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something like guilt. The gun was still aimed at my forehead. "I'm sure you want an explanation, son." I stared at him with fury. "Kidnapping doesn't require an explanation." "I want to apologize for the circumstances," he said calmly. "I know you want to save her, but this must be done. It's our tradition, one that predates even my birth. Every year, on December 5th, we take one child from the area. We offer them to the Christmas gods to appease them, so that he doesn't terrorize us. It used to be far worse. He came himself, in the dead of night, and took the naughty ones. Dragged them to his lair, impaled them, boiled them, devoured them. Many generations ago, my grandfather made a deal with him. Every year, we give him one pure soul. In return, he leaves the rest of the children alone. When I saw little Elizabeth, I knew, it was her. The girl was so kind she even gave us her address. As if she were offering herself willingly. Who are you talking about?" I demanded. "Who's taking her?" Frederick looked at me with grave seriousness. The Christmas lights on the stage began to flicker. Music started playing from a distant speaker, "Here Comes Santa Claus." But it was distorted, warped, wrong. The singer's voice dropped into a low demonic growl. I realized the lyrics were playing backward. Icy goosebumps crawled across my skin. The hall turned into a freezer. A cold, lifeless glacier that seemed to shrink, squeezing the air from my lungs. "He's coming. We need to leave," Anders shouted. His voice trembled with impatience and fear. "Don't do anything foolish, fool," Frederick said, lowering the gun. "Otherwise, far more children will disappear." He held out his hand to me. I slapped it away. As I staggered to my feet, Frederick grabbed my shoulder tightly and whispered, "Don't look at him." Chains clanked. Something was approaching from the darkness. It moved slowly, and with every metallic clatter, my heart beat faster. "Who's coming? What is that?" I screamed. No one answered. The world began to spin. Nausea washed over me. Bill and Eric had already bolted. When they ran past me, I turned and fled after them. I was terrified. I had never been this afraid in my life. Not when I was deployed to the Middle East. Not when my unit was ambushed in broad daylight. Not when I lay bleeding on a desert road, leg gone, after an IED destroyed my truck, my men, my dog. We ran together, fear driving me forward. I didn't watch my step, and that was my mistake. My prosthetic caught, and I fell flat. The others kept running, leaving me alone with the approaching monster. I glanced over my shoulder. I wish I hadn't. An impossibly tall figure loomed over the red chair. With long, bony fingers, the creature untied the knot of the sack. It wore a heavy brown robe draped in shackles and chains. Two massive horns twisted like the letter C jutted from beneath its hood. I looked at its legs. Gray, hairy limbs ended in black, rotting hooves. I screamed. The creature snapped its head toward me, revealing two glowing red eyes, two burning coals blazing with hellfire. I blacked out from shock. When I woke up, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a Jeep. Frederick was behind the wheel, watching me. Awake? His eyes were wide, bloodshot. "Here. Drink some cocoa. It'll help." The German, whose conscience had apparently resurfaced, handed me a thermos. What the hell was that?" I asked weakly. It all felt like a nightmare, but those red eyes still burned in my mind's eye. I shuddered, shaking off the remnants of sleep, took the thermos, grimaced at the taste of lukewarm cocoa, and drained it in 3 greedy gulps. Frederick took a deep breath and looked at me heavily. "Krampus," he whispered. "The demonic spirit of Christmas. The antithesis of Saint Nicholas. Vile. Cruel. Insatiable. Pure evil. He's hunted children for millennia." His voice faltered. "He can't be stopped. That's why I told you not to interfere. I'm sorry you had to go through this, but it was necessary." I sat in silence. In shock. Numb. Outside, snow fell in heavy layers onto the trees. From time to time, a howling gust of wind exposed the black bark beneath, but seconds later, the snowfall restored their pristine white majesty. Looking at the snow, I thought about Elizabeth's family. I imagined them gathered around the Christmas tree, waiting for their daughter, a child who would never return to her gifts. Not this year. Not ever. The presents would remain untouched beneath the tree. How long would her parents keep them there, hoping for a miracle? When would they give up and put them away? A season of joy had turned into a season of mourning in an instant. And I had been naive enough to believe this was the most wonderful time of the year. Story 3, Grandma's Stories. One of my favorite traditions in Sachnik when I was a child was story time. I grew up in a large family, and every year my parents gathered everyone together, every aunt and uncle from both sides, 8 cousins, and my grandparents. Of course, as kids, my cousins and I cared only about the presents piled beneath the Christmas tree like snowdrifts. But after we unwrapped our toys and slipped into a food-induced stupor, we would gather at our grandmother's feet, and she would tell us stories. Grandma was a master storyteller. A special light always flickered in her eyes when she leaned in close and whispered. "Long, long ago." The entire room fell silent when she began to speak. Even the adults turned their heads to listen to whatever her imagination had conjured this time. The multicolored lights of the Christmas tree blinked behind her, mirroring the sparkle in her eyes. My grandmother passed away at the beginning of this year. This will be our first Christmas without her stories. Even when my cousins and I became teenagers, our parents passed 50, and our grandparents entered their 90s, she never stopped telling them. This year, Christmas will be different. Recently, I found myself reminiscing, trying to recall her greatest hits as accurately as possible. I wanted to write them down, preserve the tradition for when we have children of our own. So far, I've remembered about 7 of Grandma's stories. But I'm writing this because one more came back to me, one she told when I was about 10. That story was special. The only truly strange tale Grandma ever told us. And I want to share it with you. I don't remember its exact title, but the story went something like this. What's the best thing about Christmas for a child? Presents, obviously. And who do children think of right after mom and dad when they see gifts under the tree? Santa Claus, of course. A big man in a bright red suit. A jolly laugh. A sleigh pulled by reindeer flying through the snowy night as he delivers presents to all the good children of the world. There isn't a single child I know whose heart doesn't beat faster at the thought of Santa Claus. Good children get presents. Naughty ones get coal. At the very least, every child gets something. But Santa's job isn't just about traveling the world in one night and handing out gifts. No. He has far more serious concerns. You see, children, Santa doesn't visit every house. But on Christmas Eve, someone does. Few people know this, but there is another Santa. Or rather, he's not Santa at all. They look almost the same, except this other one doesn't wear a bright red suit. He appears to each child in a different form. He doesn't laugh. He only watches. He doesn't drink milk or eat cookies. In fact, he doesn't eat anything at all. He has no sleigh and no reindeer. He doesn't come down the chimney. No, he enters through the black door in the basement. And he knows exactly where the children's rooms are. He never brings presents. But he punishes naughty children. And the severity of the punishment depends on just how badly you behave that year. He can make children very, very sick. Some of those he visited suffered from severe stomach illness for weeks and nearly died from dehydration. There were stories of children whose pets, or even parents, simply vanished in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. In the worst cases, the homes of especially naughty children burned down, and they lost everything and everyone except themselves. My grandmother once told us about a boy named Bobby who lived a couple of towns away when she was a child. One Christmas Eve, the other Santa came for him. According to what she heard from neighbors, Bobby woke up in the middle of the night because his dog was whining, and because of unbearable pain in his feet. When he tried to get up and check on Baxter, he collapsed the moment his feet touched the floor. His toes were gone. It was clear that whoever had done this used some kind of tool. The injuries were precise and horrifying. Bobby screamed and screamed, and the dog's whining grew louder and louder. Unable to endure the sound, and despite the pain, he dragged himself across the floor to the kitchen, where Baxter was. When he reached the kitchen, the screaming didn't stop. Baxter was cowering in the corner. That's where Bobby saw his father, on his knees, shaking, clutching a baseball bat. Nearby lay his mother, motionless and terribly injured. She was still twitching, while Bobby's father sobbed, the dog whimpered, and Bobby screamed. So how do you know who will visit you on Christmas Eve, Santa, or the other Santa? My grandmother asked us. You don't. If you've been naughty, all you can do is pray. Pray and pray again that all you get this year is coal, and not illness, a dead family, or missing body parts. I don't remember the story exactly as my grandmother told it. But there is one thing I will never forget. She said this immediately after finishing the tale. And it was very strange, considering how young we were. I also remember that year she deliberately took us into a separate room, away from the adults, so they couldn't hear her story. Tell me, children, she asked quietly. Why do the words Santa and Satan use the same letters? So, those were today's stories, guys. Well, how did you like them? Did they give you a Christmas mood? Which one did you like the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And now, just a few words from me. Let's start with the first story. I really liked it. I think you noticed, it had a lot of surprisingly funny moments. I honestly kept laughing while voicing it. That contrast made it even better. Overall, it's a great story. I knew how it ended, of course, but even so, I didn't expect it to go full supernatural at the end. I originally thought it would stay grounded in a twisted human villain, a deranged woman using a child to lure mall Santas and sacrifice them to Krampus. And yeah, Krampus everywhere. I'll be honest, I only recently learned who Krampus actually is. I had no idea there was this anti-Santa figure in folklore. That idea, Santa and Satan sharing the same letters, was a really clever touch. I loved that. The plot itself works great. A guy hoping for a nice evening with a pretty mom ends up in absolute nightmare fuel. But at least he manages to save the kid. Krampus still gets his meal, his own follower, ironically, but the child survives. Dark, but satisfying. The second story was also strong. I'm not sure I fully nailed the creepy atmosphere in the narration, but the concept is powerful. A war veteran, disabled, struggling to find his place, becoming a mall Santa, it fits perfectly. The idea that a family made an ancient deal with Krampus to sacrifice children in exchange for peace? That's horrifying in a quiet, inevitable way. What makes it worse is that nothing gets fixed. No victory. Just knowledge. I actually like stories without happy endings. Happy endings can feel cheap. Here, nothing changes, the world stays broken. We just learn the truth. And that makes it scarier. The third story was more of a closing note. Not the scariest, but deeply atmospheric. I could vividly imagine being a kid, sitting with my siblings, lights off, a candle burning, grandma wrapped in a blanket, telling us about the other Santa. That kind of story sticks with you forever. Imagine hearing that as a child, being told there's another Santa, one who doesn't give gifts, who comes through the basement door, who watches, who punishes. No Cole. Something worse. Honestly, I loved that image. So yeah, write your thoughts in the comments. If you have your own creepy Christmas stories, share them too. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.